Hello there everybody, What Culture's Adam Cleary here, and we did it! We lived through the blood and the mud and the fire and the death of the Battle of Winterfell, and our reward is the final 3 episodes of Game of Thrones. With the dead defeated, everyone's attention now turns back to the battle for the Iron Throne, and specifically the rather evil woman currently sat on it. Jon knows the truth of his parentage, Dany now does as well, and the wheels of Westeros begin to turn once more. But where is all of this taking us? We don't have long to find out, with there only being 3 episodes left, so you know the drill by now. I, the three-eyed magpie, I guess, roll my eyes right the way back into my head and decide whether all the key moments were good or whether the key moments were not so good. So without further ado, my name is Adam Cleary, sadly not being joined by my voice this afternoon, and these are all the ups and downs for Game of Thrones Episode 4, The Last of the Starks. Okay, so before we start, the long night had some unbelievably epic, jaw-dropping sequences in it. It was almost hard in parts to fathom the sheer scale of the battle we were watching. The money involved was incredible. It was pretty much a feature-length film of fantasy action, but it did still leave room for some of the smaller character moments. Not as many as we got in Episode 2, but still some. And Episode 4 feels more like a return to what we had in Episode 2. It's not quite as well done as that. It's not as neat, not as quite as nuanced, but it does at least feel like it's trying to get back to what it is we really love about Game of Thrones. We had all the Brienne and Jaime stuff, which I'll get to more in a minute. There was all the Dan and Johnny stuff. There was Arya and Gendry, Tyrion and Sansa, and best of all, Arya and the Hound. Probably the easiest way to word this is that Episode 2 felt like a great installment of Game of Thrones, the TV show, and Episode 3 felt like a great installment of Game of Thrones, the movie. This was definitely more the former than the latter, so it's getting it up. One slight little caveat I'm going to add to this is while I am delighted they are doing more Arya Hound stuff, because at one point that was one of the best things in the entire show, I am a little bit sad that we're only going to get 2 episodes of it, although the possibility of those 2 versus Cersei in the Mountain is appealing. Right, I can't believe I'm actually having to do this, right? But I can't not address this. How do you leave a coffee cup in shot for an entire scene? You get $15 million per episode. How many people are on set that day and not a single person went, Kit, Amelia, one of you's left your frappuccinos on the table there. Can we, like, how many people have to watch this before it goes out? Like, 100? All the effects people, all the directors, all the producers, most of the cast have seen this before it goes out, and not one person spotted the coffee cup in the middle of the table. It's not even like near the edge of the shot, it's in the middle of the scene. Unbelievable. Down. It's not just me, that is definitely a coffee cup, isn't it? Like, it's not just some ancient drinking vessel that just happens to have a nice curved plastic lid and a coffee company logo on it. That is, I can't believe it. Anyway, though, back to the important stuff. There is a party in Game of Thrones, and parties never, ever, 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 ever end well for anybody involved. Nobody gets stabbed up in this one, mercifully, but there is that constant sense of unease and dread. The entire episode feels like people moving little chess pieces around a board, getting ready for something big to happen, and I absolutely love that. Just all the little glances here and there as certain people are doing certain things, and it just cuts to one character who's just giving them a look, like Dany especially, when everyone's eulogizing Jon and calling him a mad bastard who rides a dragon and a king and all of that. It's just, you're not allowed to feel comfortable in Westeros, and if the show loses its edge, which some people have accused it of doing, you will start to feel comfortable, and you did not feel comfortable at all any point in this episode, but the banquet scene especially. So, alright, I did say I was going to come back to this, and, well, this is pretty much where the good stuff happens. Jaime and Brienne are having one hell of a season together. He knighted her in Episode 2, which was very dusty in the room for me at that point, and they kept saving each other repeatedly during the Battle of Winterfell, and now it has all come to a head because they've had sex. Get it? Head. But of course, this is Game of Thrones, and just as you think you are about to eat the juicy fruit of the nice thing, you bite into it, and of course the core is absolutely rotten. After he beds her, after he finally sees her for a woman as well as a knight, he leaves her because he still wants Cersei. Apparently he still loves his sister. That was really hard to watch. That was an absolutely brutal scene. And can I call this now? Gwendoline Christie and Nikolai Coster-Waldau, they are having low-key the best seasons from an acting perspective? Yes, they are. Oh. I mean, this is kind of on a knife edge at this point, though, because depending on what he actually does from here, then it's either one of the best bits of character work the show has ever done, or a complete betrayal of his entire arc, rendering the last 2 seasons completely useless for him. We will have to wait and see, but for now, it is enthralling viewing, so yes, good. Tell you what isn't good though, Ghost. Charged the walkers, lived to tell the tale, lost an ear, been so badly underused for the past couple of seasons, and now that's it. He's gone. Going north of the wall with Tormund. Bye Ghost. Bye one of the best things in the show that we never used properly and now never will because we've just sent you out of the show now. I know it's a dog, right? I know it's a dog, but it deserves better. It deserves so much better, and now it won't happen, and I'm annoyed at that, and I'm giving it a down because I can. So there you go. One character that is actually being used properly, though, he's just such a good boy, it really, really annoys me. Anyway, one character that is being used properly now is Varys, and dear God, where has he been for the last 2 seasons? Varys is one of the characters that this whole concept of the Great Game is built upon. It was people like him and Littlefinger that made the political battle for the Iron Throne so very enthralling. Now recently, the last season or 2, it's all been more big army smashy uppy, so there's not very much for people like him to do, but now that we're getting back into these dark rooms where all the scheming is happening, there is. His scene with Tyrion where they're discussing the truth about Jon and whether or not he'd be a more suitable ruler than Dany was the highlight of the entire episode. It reminds you what a great character Varys used to be and how important having someone who serves the realm is for the overall story. It reminded you why he's so good. It had all these little nods to the books. It set up so many potential twists, and on its own, it gets it up. Now, one criticism that does occasionally get leveled at the show these days is that it has lost its ability to shock you. Now, I think that's partially fair, partially not, but in this episode, we get one hell of a shock. Out of absolutely nowhere, Rhaegal is pumped full of scorpion bolts and plummets dead into the sea. Just like that, gone. Out of absolutely nowhere, another one of Dany's children dead right in front of her eyes. Now, I will discuss whether or not they should actually have done that in a little bit, but in that moment, it was a visceral shock, the kind the show doesn't really do anymore, so I'm gonna give it an up. Now, while the moment itself isn't up, it's also become the thing that everyone's latched onto to represent these gaps in logic that have creeped into the episode. And the question of, if you are literally flying around in the air and can see everything, how does an entire fleet of ships sneak up on you is a valid one. I have to admit as well, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but this is a fantasy drama. We can allow things to not completely make sense, provided they're being used to progress the story in an interesting way. But where this episode falls down repeatedly is that it stops showing us these things we want to see. When there's these little moments where things are going to progress the way we want them to, we don't get them. Now, these things I'm going to talk about here could all be downs in their own right, but they're all kind of part of the same thing, and if I pulled them all out, I'd be being really hypercritical, so I'm going to lump them into one. Bronn, for example, could have really used another scene somewhere that just established why he was so willing to turn on Tyrion and Jaime. Like, I know the answer is because he's a sellsword, but that is a 2-dimensional answer for what is a very 3-dimensional character. In the last season, he could have taken his money and ran, but no, he decided to stay by Jaime's side and face down an actual dragon instead. So, how do I get from that to this? Help me out, HBO. The Jaime and Brienne stuff, as I've said, was very good, but it just needed that one little extra scene in the middle, somewhere between him sleeping with her and leaving her, just to really get the emotional heft of that across. Plus, there was the Rhaegal thing as well, like, big, shocking moment, but I need to see the impact that has on Dany especially, and we got no time to really unpack that moment. But dear God, the worst offender by a million miles was that scene in the Godwood. Jon tells Arya and Sansa the truth about his parentage, the thing that has defined his character and now must define the entire show. Doesn't matter how much he says he doesn't want the Iron Throne, he is the rightful heir to it, and this is now the biggest thing in the entire show. It's the biggest thing about his character, it's now the biggest thing to Arya and Sansa, and we don't get to see their reaction. He tells Bran to tell them, and then we cut and we move on. That is their brother who is telling them that he is not their brother. He is in actual fact the heir to the Iron Throne. I want to see what Sansa and Arya make of that, and not merely infer it through their actions in other scenes. Give us that moment. That could have been half an episode in of itself in another season. Instead, it's just, tell them. That's it. That's it! Now, far be it from me to tell anybody how to make a television show. I have never ever done that myself, but surely that is one of the big emotional payoffs to your biggest narrative point. You you give the audience that. We deserve that. I want to see that. I've put so much into these characters in this story. I want to see how it affects them. And yes, anyway, I'm rambling now. Those could all have been little tiny downs in their own right, but it's all kind of the same thing. So one down. I'm giving all those missed opportunities one down, because I'm kind. Anyway, though, moving on, this was Cersei Lannister's comeback episode, in so much as she has barely been in the season at all and was not in the last 2 episodes for even 1 minute, but she's back now. To be fair, actually, she's not even in this episode a huge amount either. She gets very little screen time, very little dialogue, but what a reminder all that is of just how incredible Lena Headey is as an actress. She gets, what, 5 or 6 lines max? She's on screen for, I would guess, 7 to 8 minutes, but how much does she get done with that? Just a little tiny confession here before I go on. While I thought the moment itself was excellent, I did find, in hindsight, the death of Rhaegal to be quite a lazy way of getting the second dragon out of the show, but from a plot perspective, you did need to do that. You did need to tear Dany down, because otherwise she was going to be way too overpowered. And while that is the correct decision from a narrative sense, it works so much better from a character one. Like 1 episode ago, the mere idea that Cersei could have been a credible threat was absolutely ridiculous, but now she has entirely flipped the tables on the entire show. Less than 1 episode ago, I had absolutely no idea how in the hell Cersei could possibly win, and now I have absolutely no idea how she could possibly lose. That is some achievement, that's so And finally, one thing I think is really important to point out is that Emilia Clarke often gets a lot of criticism for her acting ability in this show. Now, you might think that's fair, you might think that's not fair, but I think we can all agree that she's rarely amongst the show's strongest performers. Her scene with Jorah at the end of episode 3 was, in my opinion, her finest moment in the entire show up until this point, but if anything, she surpasses that here with an absolutely stellar performance. Like, this is somebody who gets criticised for a lack of expression and a lack of emotion, and I would argue in this episode she has more of that than the entire cast combined. And as well as that, this does feel like a momentous episode for Dany as a character. Like, she's never quite the focal point of any of the scenes, but she seems to come out of all of them having just something just seeming to snap ever so slightly. Where that bit with Jon, something snaps. That bit with Sansa, something snaps. When she sees Rhaegal die, something snaps. At the end with Melisandre, something snaps. The show is definitely trying to get us to think that she is heading down the Mad Queen route. Now, Game of Thrones of old would be doing that so it could flip it on its head. Game of Thrones of now, who knows? And just to circle back around onto my original point, that whole setting up the Mad Queen thing, something snapping in her head, would not work as well as it does in this episode were it not for Emilia Clarke's performance. So yes, well done. So there you have it. Those are all the ups and, of course, all the downs for Game of Thrones Season 8, Episode 4, The Last of the Starks. My friends, we are in the end game now, to borrow a phrase from another Stark-related property. And just one last thing before I go. I know a lot of people are starting to turn on it a bit now, saying it isn't what it once was, I don't like it anymore, why is this happening, this is stupid, that's dumb, this could have been done better, etc, etc, and, well, none of you are wrong, are you? But it's still the best thing on television by a mile, and we will have to judge it as a complete body of work as and when it finishes. And between now and then, I still think we are in for one hell of a ride. So join me for it, won't you? I'll probably end up doing a much longer video on this at some point, but right now in the show it feels like we're trying to set up this very historical idea that great revolutionaries do not necessarily make great leaders. Dany is undoubtedly a great revolutionary. We saw her take all these cities, pretty much the entire continent of Essos, in the first few seasons of the show, and now it looks like she's going to finally take the Iron Throne as well. And she does all that, inspiring an almost religious-like following from those underneath her. Melisandre said Dracarys as her last words before she had her head cut off, and that is the word Dany used to break the chains in Essos. People see her as a great revolutionary, but they're also sowing so many seeds for her not being a great ruler. Like, she cannot compromise, she is brutal, she is ruthless, she is impulsive, she is aggressive, all things that Jon Snow isn't. He is clearly the more natural leader, if not the more natural revolutionary. And if that is what they're doing, then the final battle of Game of Thrones is not going to be between Cersei and the good guys, it's going to be between crazy Daenerys and really sensible Jon Snow. And, well, what a prospect that is. Anyway, though, you all know the drill by now. Let us know what you made of it all in the comments below. They're just right there. And of course, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for watching full reviews of Game of Thrones on both this and the Got Culture channel over the course of the week. But in the meantime, I've been Adam Cleary, third of his name. I'll see you soon.